our next speaker. This is Cliff Tironi, who's coming today from beautiful Rhode Island to share his expertise and wisdom with us. Cliff, please do turn on your camera, join us. Cliff Tironi is the Executive Vice President of Strategic Accounts for Finnair, a digital transformation company that integrates IoT data from sensors, employee feedback, and AI analytics. Cliff is a co-creator of the real-time feedback platform used in Finnair's platform as the core tool utilized in driving their change management consulting. Cliff, it's always a pleasure to have you here. We learned so much, and on behalf of our global audience, welcome and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Jose, for having me here. Very excited about it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and everyone should see this perfectly. Okay, great. So thank you for your time, and thank you for that wonderful, warm introduction, Jose. Like I said, I'm really excited to be back here at the BTOES conference. And we're here to talk about augmented intelligence and how the combination of both IoT data and human insight can really lead to unprecedented levels of insight. Before I do that, though, I really want to give some education around what Industry 4.0 is and why it's important to today's business opportunities, especially in the financial services sector. And I'll give you some examples of how that's being applied. To briefly put, though, Industry 4.0 into perspective, let's first look at some of its predecessors. And so Industry 1.0 was really the early use of power. That was the introduction of mechanization and steam and water power, and that was somewhere around the late 1700s or so. Industry 2.0 was mass production, and that was when assembly lines were created and we started using electrical power, and that was somewhere around the late 1800s or so. Industry 3.0 was really around computing and automation, and that was the rise of automated production and computers and mainframes and IT systems. And that was somewhere around the mid to late 1900s. And that really brings us to today with Industry 4.0, where everything is connected to everything. There's smart factories, there's autonomous systems, there's IoT, and all this is happening right now. And so it's a very exciting time. In Industry 4.0, most enterprises are comprised of like a variety of different inputs. Inventory, there's people, obviously, there's machines, and there's processes. And this entire system was really designed to create value. And until recently, business leaders had limited visibility into this system. And so to enhance that level of value creation, leaders solved visible problems, right? Those that were defined by after the fact data and outcomes. And so this presented a lot of limitations, and a lot was left unknown about the enterprise and the invisible problems that impacted operations. And so Industry 4.0 really represents a transformation in that, and it brings immediate insight and automated change. And I like to think of it as a transformation that makes the invisible visible. And so with that, there's really rapid digitization of data, there's the digitalization of processes, and then there's also the digital transformation of business strategy. And all these culminate in smart enterprises and smart buildings, and really giving that unprecedented insight into the invisible problems like I'd mentioned before. And these smart enterprises automate solutions now, and they prevent negative outcomes and really help to optimize for positive ones. And so some of the tools that I'm sure you've heard, and many of you probably even practice in Industry 4.0, include things like the Industrial Internet of Things, right, or IoT, edge computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and these are really paving the way to a completely networked and highly automated means of doing business. But as you're going to see here in a minute, it's not just about technology. There's also a big people component to this, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And so you could think of IoT as an enabler of Industry 4.0, and IoT platforms really use connected devices and edge computing to make the enterprise smart. And so many times, firms attach connected devices to an enterprise's existing objects and equipment and environment. And in other applications, devices are actually directly integrated into specialized materials. And so in the early years of IoT, solutions used radio frequency ID. Right? I'm sure many of you probably use this, and maybe some of you still are using this. Otherwise known as RFID technology, to connect devices. And while RFID was a good first step, RFID is really slow and less accurate when it compares to IoT. And so now most solutions are using Bluetooth Low Energy, right, BLE, and cellular technology to connect their devices. And so these devices collect, process, and store literally millions of data points per second. And at its basic level, this data collection and aggregation and analysis really helps business leaders to report on what's happening at any given moment. And so, like I said before, it really helps to make those invisible problems visible, solvable, and as you'll see here in a second, especially in the financial services sector, preventable. And so here you see an image of how beacons, these are also commonly referred to as sensors, can capture, process, and present data from connected devices. I'm actually going to hold one up to my camera here that we use at my company, Thin Air, and we have a whole host of different beacons. This is just one of them. And these beacons are matched to business project needs. And with the right hardware and through a diverse set of these different beacons, we can capture really critical information about assets such as the health of machines and environmental conditions such as temperature and humidity and inventory management and cycle counting, all through real-time locationing of assets. And these are served up in really clear and front-end data visualizations, and you're seeing a sample visualization here on the right-hand side of your screen. And so as we think about analytics, lastly here, before we talk about some of the other pieces in financial services and change management, IoT and these connected systems really gather information, and it gives this unprecedented level of insight into the enterprise. And it really enables things like predictive analytics to see the future. It certainly helps to make faster and better decisions, and also helps on the automated side of intervention, prevention, and optimization. And so one example that I want to give you here in the financial services sector is around something that maybe many of you are steeped in or have colleagues that are, and that's around the preventative maintenance of ATM machines. And you're seeing two different views here at the top. There's these 5 different buckets or 5 different stages, and the gray ones represent what historically happens when an ATM goes down. And this is all downtime that an end user like myself, if I want to go and take money out, would experience. And so typically what happens in a reactive environment is there's a system or machine failure, and you're seeing that there in the first box. A ticket is created with the financial service that's servicing it. There's an analysis, and service is usually dispatched, and then it takes time to repair it. And then finally, hopefully, you get to some level of resolution. What these sensors enable is a much more proactive, forward-looking. And so in this case, you have data triggers and predictive alerts are sent. The analysis can be done, and we can actually collect human feedback too, which I'll show you here in a second. And so now, for that service person servicing that ATM, the only downtime is associated with the repair that's needed, and then the resolution happens. And so that really helps to open up a lot more uptime for end customers such as myself to take out their money. And it also provides a lot less strain and drain on resources for the financial institution that's servicing these ATMs. And this is one of a ton of different examples I could give you. And And I think what's really exciting here is as you think about your own data that you're collecting, and you're seeing on the left-hand side there where it says existing system data, in this case of like the ATM failures, ATMs are already collecting like different error logs. What IoT and Industry 4.0 represents is this complete transformation by capturing IoT data through sensors like this and understanding things like the temperature of the ATMs or the vibration of different components within the ATM itself. But then we can also combine that with the power of human feedback and understand, get photos and videos and human context that they log through a mobile application. And so the combination of existing data with entirely new data sources through IoT devices and human feedback is an amazing way to drive digital transformation, and in this case, support the not only the installation but also maintenance and prediction of ATM health machine, the health of ATM machines. And so that's what we do at ThinAir, is that we transform our clients' operations with a digital transformation solution. And what we combine is the IoT beacons, and we like to think of this as telling you what's happening with your assets. We combine that with the power of human feedback, and that tells you why something is happening. And then the combination of those two with some AI-backed analytics tell you how you can go about and not have that happen again. And so I want to give you some examples of what this looks like. And some of our clients, when they start using our services, some of them start by using just sensors, right? Just want to collect some data on knowing where their assets are. Others start by just collecting feedback to start from their employees on different processes, initiatives. And other clients start with the combination of the two. And I think this is a really valuable quote from Jessica Knight. She's a VP at Gartner. When we think about change management and technology, tech is not a silver bullet, and there's some really great sessions here at the BTOES conference. Jose and team always line up such amazing speakers. And you know, a lot of you are speaking about and learning about change management. This quote about employees' ability to absorb change plummeted precisely at a time when organizations need change the most, is really timely. And so what we do at ThinAir is usually what we do is some level of discovery to understand and first ensure that the technology that we're deploying matches a business problem, right? We don't want to go in and say, hey, here's some shiny new tech, now let's go find your problems. We like to start by defining problems first and then seeing if the technology can help with that. We then deploy both IoT sensors and collect human feedback. We mash that up, and you're seeing here on the analytics slide. And then we use that to actually bring about culture change through supportive change management and strategic communications back out to the associate base and to the employees. And so I want to give you an example of what this looks like. This is just some example of a screen of how employees can give feedback on a different process. And in this case, imagine that you're a plant operator and a machine goes down. This beacon can ping that plant manager to then provide photos and videos into why what happened. And so we combine those two different data sources and then really serve it up in some really robust analytics dashboards. I don't want to give you a demo. This is not to be demos. It's really meant to be educational, but I want to give you some context here. Do some really cool stuff around root cause analysis and understanding the health of different assets and machines, and even things like inventory optimization. Okay, so you may be sitting there saying, okay, this looks great, but how the heck does this work in practice? And what are some of the outcomes of different companies that are adopting this holistic approach to digital transformation? Well, I want to show you that right here and right now. And so this is an isometric graph, and this is really just one example of many different business use cases. So don't think that this is the only one. If if you're sitting there saying, "Oh, this is how IoT is applied," this is one of many. And so in this case, how IoT data and human insight come together in a connected, digitally transformed way, I want to walk you through a few different steps here. In step one, you can imagine a scenario where these are monitoring materials and equipment within a physical location. That provides a firm immediate location of all the different tagged assets. In step two, cellular beacons now can track outside of that environment, shipping and logistics, and provide updates when materials arrive or don't arrive, right? So you're not confined to just the bounds of four walls. You can actually go outside of those four walls. In other cases, beacons can monitor things like temperature, humidity, airflow, and lots of other. In step four, this is where the employee now attaches beacons to a shipment, and with their mobile phone, they can actually upload the IDs to different platforms. And then you're seeing in the top hand screen here how those beacons can monitor temperature and vibration of a machine to learn and detect anomalies, in this case with a pinning machine. Now in step six here, you're seeing how the platform sends an automated message to an employee that, hey, look, there might be an issue with this machine. That employee can send out a feedback request to their employees and say, can you give me deeper insight, right? I'd like to understand this issue a little bit more. And so now that employee can go and give feedback, they can report on what's happening, node code dashboards, aggregate both IoT and human insight, and provide that feedback into the operation. And a team member can manage all these different hundreds and thousands of interactions that are happening in your business on a daily basis with a push of a button. And so it's a really exciting time to be driving digital transformation forward. Some of the outcomes where this is actually helping clients is in things like finding misplaced assets. And so this is one example of a Fortune 100 company in just one factory of a much larger enterprise. So we're enterprise-wide, but this example right here is just in one factory itself, addressing a $6 million opportunity where they had a really difficult time tracking their assets. And then that tracking led to extra labor hours and loss of materials, and then purchasing equipment when they didn't need to. And so by tracking their assets using a Bluetooth low energy solution, using sensors like this, in really next to no time, a few months, helped reduce the number of assets misplaced in half, from 8% to 4%, and led to a 63% reduction in the number of days that it took to find those misplaced assets. Another example is understanding the machine health, and this kind of goes back to the example I gave before on the ATM predictive maintenance, understanding when machines may or may not be in an anomalous state. You're seeing on the right-hand side here an example of different color codings that identify when machines may or may not be operating optimally. And if they're not, being able to capture feedback from your employees as to what's happening becomes a critical component. And so I want to give you an example here, since we are at a financial services conference, of how Fiserv, and I know there's an amazing presentation from Fiserv here in this conference as well. Fiserv has been using our platform to really drive a culture of excellence amongst their card services team. And we presented on this last year at the BTOES Financial Services Conference with Patrick Law. He's one of the executives at Fiserv. And like I said before, sometimes clients start with just sensors, other times they start with just feedback, and other times they use the combination of the two. In this case, Fiserv has a real strong history of using the human feedback piece, and you can see this great quote from Patrick around how they're using real-time feedback to solve complex operational challenges, and they've actually connected the financial institutions' feedback that they service, clients that they service, they've connected their feedback to associate training. and they're able to listen to their clients in a very nimble way and then drive excellence for them in a truly digital transformative way. And so some of the examples that I want to give you here of how Fiserv is using employee feedback to really digitally transform their operations transcends geography, where especially now more and more people are working remotely, able to collect that feedback across different geographical bounds in a very, very easy way, across hierarchy, right? And so I'm able to give skip level feedback up to my boss and my boss's boss on different processes. And I say, you know what? This system may not be working so well. Have we considered this? Or, hey, this is working great over here. Let's keep doing that. And so it breaks down and really flattens the organization to give skip level feedback. And then also across function too. These are just some of the different divisions across which Fiserv is using and exchanging in real-time feedback. You can see all these great colors and how people are interacting cross-functionally. And so it's really this power of going across geography, hierarchy, and function that Fiserv is using real-time feedback to bring about change management and drive a culture of excellence for the future. I want to end here on two last bits. This is one story because we're in a digital transformative age, and we think about how much data we can capture. And I don't think anyone argues that it's any difficult now to start to capture data. The challenge really is, and what do you do with it? And when it comes to culture change, collecting data, of course, is super important. This is a really great story, though, from World War II, because it speaks to how you can actually redefine your business problems, and sometimes the data that you don't have is just as important as the data that you do have. And the story is that researchers at the Center for Naval Research during World War II were conducting an analysis of US bombers that were flying over Nazi Germany, and they created a heat map visualization of the bombers that returned to the United States, and they painstakingly started plotting where the different bombers were getting shot. And there wasn't Excel or Tableau or Power BI back in the early 1940s. And so they created this map by hand, and that's what you're seeing here on your screen of all the different places that a lot of the US bombers that returned were getting hit. And so these researchers wanted to then go and fortify the metal components of the plane where the bullets were striking the plane, which was predominantly, as you can see, in the body and the wings and the back wings. And it wasn't until a researcher by the name of Waltz said, whoa, wait a minute, you're not defining the problem correctly here. What the researchers were doing was creating a heat map of the bombers that returned. And so he actually said it's actually all the bombers that were getting shot and going down. The researchers did not have a history of that because they were only mapping the bombers that returned. And so he said, don't fortify the body and the wings, fortify the cockpit and parts of the tail where you're not seeing data here. And so he actually redefined that problem, and then they fortified those areas that were most susceptible to planes being shot and then going down. And so when you think about your change management efforts and as you're collecting data, sometimes the data that you don't have is just as important as the data that you do have. And when it comes to change management, sometimes not hearing from different populations is just as powerful as those that you do hear from. And we do this all the time at Finnair, where we come in and we help our clients with change management, a data-driven change management for their digital transformation initiatives. And we segment employees based on how frequently and what they say, but then also with those that we don't hear from. And I want to reinforce that you can do the same. And I'm happy to talk afterwards with anyone that's interested in comparing notes in this space. And so lastly, I'll provide you with this before we turn it over to the Q&A portion, is for anyone that is interested in learning more about this or would like to have their own tailored digital transformation ideation session. This is very much an educational workshop that we are offering a limited number of seats for. And it goes over some of the pieces that I went over here today around what Industry 4.0 is and IoT and how it can be applied to financial services. And so it's very much a business focused first, technology second workshop. And it usually takes about a few hours. And if anyone is interested, please drop me a note. What you gain from this is that you can define problems that can be addressed with an IoT solution. Many times people come to us and they say, oh man, I've got this great idea, but I don't know how it maps to this, or I really have to wrangle these stakeholders here internally. And so this is a great way to help really truly define what your business problems are first, and then see if technology can map to that. It also helps you to project the financial impact of potential solutions, and really will give you and your stakeholders a customized solution mapping roadmap for your company. And so, like I said, we're offering a few of those. We have a whole curriculum around it. There's no fee for it. It's something that if you're interested in, I'm happy to engage with you further on and really talk through what your most pressing business challenges are. Here's my contact info as well. It's Cliff Tironi at thinair.io, and I think we're just about to come up on time here. And so, Jose, I'll stop sharing my screen and happy to take any questions from the audience.
It's fantastic, Cliff. Always so insightful to hear and see your presentation. I'm scanning through the questions from the audience right now, and one of the I'm trying to get some sort of logical sequence here, and I think a good place to start is that a lot of the organizations that are watching this live, and those who are going to be watching the recording of our interaction here, are at different levels of maturity on their digital transformation. As you said very well, some are on digitizing, others are digitalizing, and others are transforming. What is there something that you would advise for someone who is starting the journey of digital transformation? If you look back at the ones you've been part of, what are some of the things that people and organizations should try to get right that may be often overlooked as they go down the journey?
Yeah, thanks, Jose. So there's a few key pieces to this. It has to start with defining your problems accurately, right? And this is something where we have given presentations at other BTOES conferences, and I may have even shown some examples of my cat and how that actually pertains to this. But for those that didn't see that, it's a really funny story. Really understanding and defining your problems first is the key component. And there are lots of different structured exercises that companies can do to do that. Once you define your business problems and the ones that you want to tackle first, then it becomes about starting small. No need to boil the ocean. And we work with big companies, small companies, and the most success that we see is when people start with a really, really clearly defined problem and they start small. And then from there, it can always grow, but just, I would say, take that first step, and then the rest usually helps. If you start too big and go big or go home first with digital transformation, usually there's lots of angst and worry from employees, and that's where things just get sometimes a little bit messy.
That's good advice, for sure. And then as you, what would be a good place to start? How do you go about identifying battles big enough to matter, but small enough that you can win when you're starting, down this path?
Yeah, no, it's definitely more of an art than a science. I think that really balancing that fine line between what can we address now, not in 5 years. At the same time, just if we can start now doesn't mean it has to be on a small project, because you want it to have an ROI. And so I think the more data that anyone can collect around what are their costs around that problem, both current and projected and historical, that becomes a really good way of saying, okay, we think this is a problem. How much are we spending on it? And then what do we hope that a solution can address? Those are good pieces to help stratify, to really split the balance between what can we address that's not so big, at the same time isn't so small that it won't have an impact for us.
Do you have some sort of a method on maybe finding those? Is this a matter of getting with senior leaders in the organization and trying to identify these opportunities? Is it more of a bottoms up where you just get with process owners, maybe subject matter experts, and try to identify what some of these opportunities may be?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. For one, it's definitely getting especially like in the like a process owner or a facilities manager or some owner of the actual boots on the ground where it's happening, like in the case of the ATM prediction failure, like getting the boots on the ground people to understand what the problems are. I think it also helps to get on the corporate side anyone that is looking at digital transformation projects broadly. What we do at Thin Air is that we go in and we actually have a way of actually helping to tease out this process, and that was sort of the workshop that I alluded to before that we're offering this limited seats on, and that walks people through a really guided series of exercises to help refine that thinking. And the other benefit too, Jose, not just with our workshop but just in general, is the more that you can involve different cross-functional units earlier, the better. Because you may find that after 3 months of thinking that, hey, we've got this great problem and we're going to address it, and then all of a sudden they find out that Sally or Joe in this other department just piloted something, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so engaging those cross-functional stakeholders early and often, I think, is also a key component of it as well.
Very important. That's really great advice, Cliff. Now, there's a few questions here related to the real-time feedback. I think for a lot of organizations, that may be a new component, something that they have not incorporated in their, sensor data acquisition and review. Tell us a little bit more about, maybe a practical application of that. How do you incorporate the real-time feedback on a practical application with sensors, perhaps? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the real-time feedback can be used either by itself or in conjunction with sensors. And so when used by itself, because it's real time, that means that me as an employee of company X, I can go in and give feedback. It's not like a survey. It's like where someone has to push it to me. I can go in and I have a meeting about something or I notice something, and I can go in and it's always on because it's on my mobile phone or it's a desktop application, as well. On the sensor side, Jose, I'll give you a real specific example. This is where imagine one of these sensors picks up that a machine fails. That can then ping a plant manager. The plant manager can then go take his or her phone out and then take a photo or a video and say, this happened because of A, B, and C. When that plant manager hits submit, it routes to the appropriate people that are responsible for servicing, in this case, the ATM. Okay, and so that's just one data point going into one person. We can set up a web of how that feedback gets routed to different process owners. So that way I'm not getting data that's not important about the ATM installation if I work in some other service, and vice versa. When you aggregate all those different pieces of feedback and photos and comments, you can do some really, really amazing stuff when it comes to like the natural language processing of people's comments to understand key themes that keep coming up over and over again in recurring issues. And then, Jose, what you can do is once you understand those themes, when you have to message back out to the employee base around change management, you can infuse those themes into newsletters, into blogs, into websites, because they're really themes that you've heard already from the employees. And so it becomes this virtuous cycle of continually feeding and collecting data and then iterating and making changes. So I have lots of other examples and slides and use cases I could go over, but I know our time here is limited, but I'm happy to connect with anyone that would like to learn more about that afterwards.
Very, very interesting. I have Joseph Lackey is asking an interesting question here. In this digital transformations, we are, of course, as you just described, we're creating these digital environments where we have great ability to communicate, to process and analyze data, but we're also creating potentially vulnerabilities. And in a world where cybersecurity has really come to the forefront, how do you maintain this stuff and environment safe? Are there layers of security that there are in place there?
Oh yeah. I mean, anyone that's collecting either machine data or employee feedback has to go through rigorous testing. For us, we've actually underwent very extent. I mean, we have clients in healthcare, we have Department of Defense manufacturers who are undergoing really, really extensive reviews of how data is captured, stored, processed, and so that I don't have any specifics on right now on this call about different protocols. I can definitely loop in our engineers on some of that. That's well beyond my level of expertise, but we do have a lot of the all the different safety guards and firewalls set up in place to be able to address anything that's coming through sensitively. And those reviews are not for the faint of heart. I'll tell you that. I do know that the Department of Defense was about a 12-month review, and that was we passed, but they take some time to go through, and they're important.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a good question, Joseph, to remind us of that component that again permeates all digital applications for sure. Now, Cliff, if I may, if you can go a little bit deeper, maybe one example on transactional services, one example in manufacturing applications where you're seeing kind of like good use cases of combining the power of IoT sensors and feedback and any other components. If you could talk about a couple of examples on one in transactional services, another one in manufacturing. What do they look like, and maybe a success story that you have experienced?
Yeah, sure. Can you give me an example of transactional services? I want to make sure I hit it.
Yeah, really, it's just banking processes, transactional processes. They are based on transactions and not really manufacturing or producing a product. That's all.
Yeah, so I mean, I think transactional processes are really ripe for IoT, right? Because so much of it is just automated. Where I think there's a lot of, especially in transactional, where there is that low human touch at the point of transaction, where we see a lot of opportunity is in the people that are sort of behind the scenes managing those transactions, but they're not like directly like in the manufacturing, like there's a manufacturing line, right? And so in that case, Jose, the power of human feedback comes into play because it's not about at the point of transaction, but rather it's very process driven organizations that aren't directly touching the actual transaction. And so in that case, engaging employees, collecting their feedback, managing that change is super, super critical. On the, I'll give you a really good example of that here in a second. And another example is with a car manufacturer, one of our clients, and they're collecting feedback from on the quality and service side when once a car comes in to be serviced at a bay, and the technician is left scratching his or her head saying, this is, it's not like an oil change, it's something really, really more important than that. Technicians can now take their phones and take photos and videos, and that routes to the appropriate quality assurance people, right? But that's on post-sales side. And they're collecting human feedback from technicians around that to really understand their product anomalies. All the way back on the manufacturing line, it extends to using sensors to understand if a piece of metal during the curing process of that equipment was done correctly, or was it done optimally, I should say. And so we're in a stage right now where we can get true end-to-end. Oh, and by the way, not just once it was cured, that metal, but then even the transportation of that and the assembly of it, and then it actually goes throughout into the field. These are some really, really innovative ways and ways that we're helping our clients have and address both manufacturing and transactional opportunities through IoT and human feedback.
Super interesting. I mean, definitely we're seeing more of, as you highlighted, that this integration of the human side with the technology side. What are some of the challenges that you see when you're implementing these approaches, Cliff? What type of things that the clients may maybe not well prepared for, maybe push back on because they don't see upfront the value? What are some of the barriers that you have to overcome to have a good implementation?
Yeah, so definitely communicating out broadly early on is a key piece. And you don't want people unplugging your gateways because they don't understand, they think Big Brother is watching or anything like that. And so what we always like to do is, when we do a deployment, is spend, even if it takes a little bit more time, Jose, it's worth its weight in gold. Spending a little bit more time up front on that discovery and that change management piece first, and then deploying the tech. And I think there's a few ways to do that. One way is to engage different senior leaders and take a top-down approach and say, hey, look, we're about to deploy this pilot, or we're about to go broader than that. Can you please message this to your different staff and let them know some of the goals as to why we're doing this? In other cases, Jose, we actually go right into the trenches and go out to the front line, speak with people that are addressing these problems and have these unmet needs. And like in the case of the car retailer, meeting with technicians and understanding, and then explaining to them, hey, look, we're about to do this pilot, and this is why it's important. And then using some of their stories to then, in the messaging out to the broader group around why this change is coming and why it's important. And then I would say thirdly, really segmenting your different stakeholders into different groups. So usually we segment it based on executives and mid-level managers and frontline employees, and then coming up with targeted messaging, even if it's something as simple as an email, right? Being able to speak to them and what matters most to them in that messaging matters, because you need their buy-in to have the digital transformation initiative, whatever it is, be a success.
Cliff, fantastic insights. We always learn so much by listening to you. Your examples are very good. And on behalf of our global audience, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here, share your expertise with us. It's a real pleasure. And as a matter of fact, you mentioned this during your presentation. Our next session is actually with a leader of change from Fiserv on orchestrating change. So this is a beautiful continuity on what you have presented here, and they're going to discuss some other aspects of that change. So thank you again for sharing your wisdom and expertise with our global audience today.
Oh, thank you for having me. And yes, I can't wait to see her presentation. I'm excited. I'll be waiting here with bated breath. I can't wait. So thank you, Jose.
Thank you, Cliff. Ladies and gentlemen, Cliff Tironi from Finnair with us here. Always a pleasure learning about this augmentation of IoT and human insight with the feedback component that the that he talked about that really brings extra dimensions to the data that's being collected by these automated devices. Well done, and very, very interesting session. We're going to wrap up now. When we come back, we're going to have Nilufer Narendran with us. She's the Director of Transformation at Fiserv, and she's going to talk about orchestrating change, key insights on driving successful global multicultural transformation initiatives. So we'll hang up for now. See you back at the top of the hour with Nilufer.